I knew something was off the minute our CEO stopped blinking during all-hands meetings. You ever watch someone lie with their whole face? That's what it was. His eyes locked open like a damn doll and his smile stretched like he just mainlined Botox. Every time he said agility or synergy, I pictured a sinking ship with corporate buzzwords slapped on the side. I'd been at Interline Logistics for 5 years, and while I'd seen my fair share of cooked books and sugar-coated forecasts, this was new. The kind of new that smells like bleach and panic. I'm not flashy. Never was. My name's Claire, and I've spent the better part of my adult life digging through spreadsheets like a raccoon in a dumpster. Risk analysis isn't glamorous, but it's honest. I didn't network. I didn't play pickleball with the CFO or post cringy motivational quotes on Slack. But I read everything. Vendor contracts, licensing memos, compliance briefs no one bothered to double-click. And lately, the numbers were whispering things that made my stomach knot. There was the $98 million strategic acquisition of a company no one could explain. Kestro's Holdings. Cute logo, blank website, and a Florida P.O. box that shared space with 17 other shell core. Then there were the nightly cross-charges, 6-figure service invoices, ping-ponging between our subsidiaries with descriptions like consulting refresh and logistics optimization tier review. Translation: bullshit disguised as busy work. Oh, and the compliance reports for Q3, gone. Like they never existed. The shared drive folder was wiped clean the same week the internal auditor went on leave. Hey, quick thing, if you're listening and even 1% of this has you curious or pissed off in a satisfying way, hit that subscribe button and toss a like our way. Seriously, 97% of people just ghost through these stories without showing love. But it helps more than you know. Now back to the mess. I tried raising a few polite flags. Sent an email to my manager, polite subject line, follow up on acquisition review criteria smiling face with smiling eyes. Got a thanks. Claire will loop back. With a gif of a hamster juggling office supplies. Classic shut up and stay in your lane response. I mentioned the discrepancies again during a compliance sync. Got a side eye from the junior counsel and a quiet Slack message that said, let's not overcomplicate things. Overcomplicate what exactly? Math? The part that really got me wasn't the lies. It was the cheerfulness. You could smell it like stale perfume. This synthetic glee wafting through the halls every time someone said, IPO ready. People were practicing their exit grin in bathroom mirrors, rehearsing LinkedIn posts about closing one chapter. Meanwhile, I was quietly saving PDFs to my personal drive. Backups of backups. Because I'd seen this movie before, and it always ended with someone like me taking the fall. The annual stakeholder gathering was coming up. Big deal. Suits flying in from Zurich, New York, Singapore. They rented out a luxury hotel downtown. Ballroom with a chandelier that cost more than my house. The CEO was already practicing his keynote in the office gym, pacing in front of the mirrors like a TED Talk meth addict. My name wasn't on any speaking docket, which was perfect. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted one chance. One real moment to ask a question that had been drilling a hole in my head for weeks. Had Clause 14 actually been satisfied? It was buried in the acquisition policy. Basically, a legal tripwire that required full regulatory clearance for every active subsidiary before any large-scale buyout could be finalized. Simple clause. But lately, it had started disappearing from internal decks. Footnotes shrank. Definitions got fuzzy. And the few people I asked about it changed the subject faster than you can say class action. So I waited, kept my head down, let the storm build behind my eyes while everyone else was clinking glasses and daydreaming about stock options. And the whole time, I was holding one sentence in my chest like a loaded gun. Not to be fired recklessly, but aimed, carefully, precisely, because I knew the second I spoke it, something would break. I just didn't know yet who'd be buried in the rubble. It started with a footnote. That's always how it begins. Something so small and dry it shouldn't matter. Page 38 of a quarterly finance summary, buried in a table labeled Asset Reallocation Forecast, pending regulatory. One-line item, Kestro's Holdings LLC $98,200,000, Integration Phase 1. No fanfare, no press release, No internal memo. Just there. Like a dead raccoon on a pristine lawn. Kestro's rang 0 bells. I typed the name into the compliance database. Nothing. No NAICS classification. No vendor history. No conflict review. That alone was a red flag. So I did what I always do when something doesn't smell right. I pulled the thread. Corporate filings listed Kestro's Holdings as a logistics intelligence firm based in Fort Lauderdale. Cute. Except its address traced back to a strip mall with a vape shop, 2 bail bondsmen, and a shuttered tanning salon. Registered agent? A woman named Tanya V., who also happened to be the agent for 26 other LLCs in the same zip code. I looked her up. Her LinkedIn tagline? Business Filing Ninja. Real subtle. Next layer, board structure. Kestro's had a 3-member board. 2 of the names were new to me. The third? Brian Halvorsen, our own VP of Strategic Expansion. I triple-checked. Same name, same credentials, same photo from the Christmas party last year. Him drunk, wearing a reindeer onesie, holding a margarita in one hand and HR's shoulder in the other. When I brought this up in a risk pipeline call, I didn't lead with drama. I asked calmly, does anyone know if Brian disclosed his Kestro's affiliation during the M and a review cycle? Silence. Then the general counsel coughed and said, that's probably a legacy affiliation from before his role here, right? A legacy board seat on a $98 million shell we just bought, that no one disclosed with no compliance review logged. Sure, Jan. Then came the missing filings. I went to retrieve the Clause 14 checklist. It's standard procedure during major acquisitions. Basically a big red button marked, don't press this until all your ducks are lined up in a tight, legally defensible row. Every compliance officer knows Clause 14 like scripture. But this time, when I opened the shared folder where those logs live, it was empty. No version history, no audit trail, no metadata. Just a blank page labeled Clause 14_clearance_final.pdf with a modified date from before the acquisition was even announced. I asked IT to pull backup logs, got a ticket response marked low priority. I pinged our junior compliance officer, Jasmine, who used to send me cat gifts with every reply. Her answer this time? I've been told not to dig into that file path anymore. No emoji, no context, just that. I started documenting everything. Screenshots, metadata, file trees. I emailed myself backups, encrypted them, stored copies on 2 separate flash drives. Not because I thought anything criminal was happening yet, but because this wasn't sloppiness. This was orchestration. You don't hide Clause 14 unless you're gambling with regulatory teeth. So I brought it up again, this time to my manager directly. I kept it formal. I'm noticing repeated inconsistencies with the Kestro's acquisition compliance workflow, specifically around Clause 14 certification timing and internal conflict disclosures. Her reply was peak corporate lavender-scented nothing. Claire, appreciate your attention to detail. We're navigating complex integration dynamics, and the executive team has visibility into all key dependencies. Let's trust the process and focus on forward momentum. Glowing star, focus on forward momentum. I swear, if I had $1 for every time I've heard that phrase used to bury a landmine, I'd be the one buying out shell companies. That's when it hit me. I wasn't supposed to be seeing any of this. Not because it was above my pay grade, but because they were counting on me not to look. Most analysts just play the part, color-code the dashboards, regurgitate KPIs, and shut up. But I'd always been the freak who actually read the footnotes. And those footnotes were starting to scream. They held it at the Marion Grand, the kind of place with crystal chandeliers the size of Buicks and waitstaff who glide like ghosts in white gloves. Outside, valets shuffled Teslas and black Escalades like chess pieces. Inside, it was all linen tablecloths, customized programs, and hors d'oeuvres no one could pronounce without apologizing. The annual stakeholder gathering, capital letters, big show. They flew in the board from every time zone. Hedge fund folks from the coast, pension reps from Chicago, a couple of private equity guys who looked like they'd eaten their interns for breakfast. Even the governor's office sent a liaison. Smiling, shaking hands, pretending this wasn't just a dress rehearsal for an IPO announcement everyone was already whispering about. I walked in wearing the same black blazer I'd worn to 3 compliance summits and a funeral. Pinned my name badge to the lapel, grabbed a seltzer and found a seat near the back. Not hiding, but not close enough to end up in any press photos either. I scanned the room like I always did. Not just who was there, but who wasn't. CFO, present. Pale. Sweaty. Avoiding eye contact like it was radioactive. CEO center stage. Beaming like a televangelist in heat. He kept clapping people on the back, even the ones clearly trying to escape him. Every word out of his mouth dripped with the same corporate foreplay. Unprecedented scale. Global momentum. Next-gen optimization. I watched him wrap one arm around a Swiss investor while using the other to slap a junior analyst on the back like they were old war buddies. The man could work a room like a con artist at a family reunion. The presentation kicked off exactly on time. It always did. A slick, overproduced video played across 3 massive screens. Warehouse drone footage, diverse stock models in safety vests. A soft piano crescendo that threatened to make logistics feel like a Disney ride. Then came the numbers. CFO walked us through record-breaking earnings. Slides flashed with rising graphs and bullet points full of buzzwords. Not one mention of Kestros. Not a single reference to Clause 14. I glanced around. Some investors were eating it up, nodding along like bobbleheads. But a few were watching. Not the stage, but the crowd. One guy in particular, gray hair, cufflinks shaped like gears, no phone out, just watching the room like it was a crime scene in slow motion. I'd seen him before. Joseph Grayson, old school, quiet billionaire, owns 6% of us, and the only one on record who'd voted against the last 2 compensation packages. That guy didn't blink unless something was bleeding. As the CFO rapped with a weak joke about AI predicting shipping patterns, the mic passed to the CEO. He launched into his closing speech like he was accepting an Oscar. There was laughter, applause, a few half-hearted cheers when he dropped the phrase, "Public ready by Q2," and then Q&A, usually a dead zone. Nobody wants to rock the boat when equity's at stake. So the questions came soft. Can you talk about expansion in Europe? How are we leveraging automation on the warehouse floor? Fluff. All of it. Polished snowballs gently lobbed underhand. I could feel my pulse in my teeth. My fingers grazed the mic clipped to the back of the chair in front of me. The assistant at the aisle smiled. I nodded, raised my hand. The CEO spotted me. His smile flickered. Not enough for most to notice, but I'd been studying him for 5 years. I saw it. That nanosecond of hesitation. Like his brain tripped over a landmine labeled Claire from Risk. The assistant brought me the mic. I stood. Steady voice. Neutral tone. But inside, every bone in my body felt like a tuning fork. Hi, I began. Claire Morgan, Risk and Compliance. Dead silence. People turned. Heads tilted. My question is for the CFO. Regarding the acquisition of Kestros Holdings, can you confirm whether Clause 14 has been satisfied across all active subsidiaries prior to integration, as required by internal policy? It hit the room like a pipe bomb made of syllables. For a moment, no one moved. No coughing. No paper rustling. Just one long, sucking vacuum of silence. The CFO opened his mouth, closed it. The CEO let out a single, tight chuckle. Complex structures require complex answers, he said, lighthearted. Let's not get too in the weeds during what's meant to be a celebratory occasion. But it was too late. The air had changed. People were looking around, not laughing, and I knew in that moment I'd either lit a fuse or walked straight into the fire. The first second after I asked the question felt like God had hit mute on the whole ballroom. You could almost hear the glasses sweating on the tables. The lights didn't flicker, but I swear they dimmed just a hair. Like even the chandelier knew I'd stepped outside the script. The CEO's smile locked in place, but his eyes went reptilian. Not angry, not even surprised, just calculating, like he'd prepared for this moment and was deciding how loud to make the consequences. The CFO, meanwhile, looked like he'd swallowed a battery. One hand twitched toward his water glass, then stopped midair like he forgot what water was. A VP near the front leaned over and whispered something to a woman I didn't recognize, who immediately pulled out her phone. Not to record, just to do something. That was the vibe now. Not what was that. But contain it. The CEO chuckled. A little too long, like he was buying time while his brain cycled through disaster protocols. Well, Claire, it's good to see risk is still passionate, he said, voice syrupy. We'll be addressing integration concerns internally, but rest assured, every compliance checkpoint has been met with the utmost professionalism. He waved a hand like he was dismissing a toddler who'd wandered into an adult conversation. Let's move on to the next question. Yes, you in the back, go ahead. But no one asked anything. People were still looking at me. Some curious, some nervous, some pretending not to see me at all, like I'd become a stain they weren't paid enough to acknowledge. I sat down. The mic was quietly retrieved. The moderator coughed into the void. The rest of the Q&A limped on. 2 more questions, both fluffier than a cupcake in a pillow factory. Something about international growth, something else about ESG priorities. No one mentioned Clause 14 again. 10 minutes later, while people clapped politely and the string quartet started up near the mimosa bar, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Claire, could you come with us? It was Kevin from HR, flanked by someone from legal, smiling too wide, like this was about to be a wellness check, not a corporate execution. We walked briskly through the side hallway. My heels echoed against the marble like a countdown clock. They didn't take me to a private room, just the vestibule near the coat check, under a sign that said restrooms. Kevin cleared his throat. We've received word that your conduct during the stakeholder event violated our behavioral standards, particularly in regards to maintaining investor confidence and the chain of command. I blinked at him. For asking a compliance question during a Q&A? He exchanged a glance with legal guy, who stared at the floor like it owed him money. It was deemed disruptive, Kevin said. Your employment with Interline is terminated, effective immediately. Your badge has already been deactivated. A severance packet will be mailed. We ask that you refrain from returning to any company premises or contacting staff moving forward. No security escort. No yelling, just corporate euthanasia by passive voice. I didn't argue, didn't shout, just stood there, watching their nervous eyes, wondering if they'd rehearsed this or if I was the first. I turned, walked to the exit. Each step felt like molasses and lightning at the same time. My brain was screaming through the numbness. They buried it. You were right. They buried it, and now they're burying you too. I hit the sidewalk. The sun had the gall to be beautiful. The valet asked if I needed my car. I said no, just started walking toward the side street. My throat was tight, my chest burning. Not grief, not fear, just rage on a low simmer. The kind of rage that makes you very, very clear. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Crisp, purposeful. Claire. I turned. It was him, Joseph Grayson. The old investor with the gear-shaped cufflinks. He didn't smile, just looked at me like a man inspecting a very old, very valuable blueprint. What exactly did you ask? He said. His tone wasn't accusatory. It was precise, measured. I repeated it, word for word. Has Clause 14 been satisfied across all subsidiaries for the acquisition of Kestro's holdings? He nodded, just once. No follow-up questions. No reaction, then turned on his heel and walked back into the building without another word. I stood there on the curb, blinking, trying to decide if I'd just been ghosted or anointed. Either way, something had shifted. And not just inside me. I didn't go straight home. I walked, 2 hours, maybe more, through side streets I hadn't seen since my intern days, past little bars and printing shops and that one laundromat with the broken vending machine that still owes me a Diet Coke. I just walked, trying to get the static out of my head. My badge didn't work anymore. My inbox was probably already archived. My Slack profile grayed out like a corpse on social media. The silence was deafening, but it wasn't unfamiliar. That's the thing about being quiet in corporate America. When you vanish, nobody asks why. They just assume you finally cracked. But I couldn't stop replaying it. The look on the CFO's face, the CEO's forced chuckle, the legal guy's shoes, tapping nervously like he knew they were about to step in something radioactive. And then Grayson. He wasn't a man you met twice. If he talked to you, it was because he'd already decided you were useful or dangerous. Sometimes both. His voice was still in my head. What exactly did you ask? That wasn't curiosity. That was a drill checking for cracks. And the nod. Just that. No questions, no commentary. Not even a polite thank you. Just a single, silent acknowledgement before he turned and disappeared into the chaos I'd left behind. It felt less like an ending and more like a pin pulled from a grenade I couldn't see. By the time I got back to my apartment, my phone had 12 notifications. None from work. A couple from friends asking why my LinkedIn said former in my job title. One from my mom. Are you okay? I ignored them all. I tossed my shoes off like they were infected and sat on the floor in my kitchen, still in my blazer, eating dry cereal out of the box and staring at the ceiling like it owed me rent. I'd been terminated in front of half the industry for asking a question. A clean, policy-aligned question with a citation and everything. Clause 14 wasn't a gotcha. It wasn't even controversial. It was procedural. If that was enough to get me canned, then something far bigger than my paycheck was unraveling behind the curtains. But I couldn't shake that flicker, that tiny spark behind Grayson's eyes. Not panic, not rage, recognition. The man had heard something that matched a shape he already knew. And that meant I hadn't imagined it. The missing reports, the cross-charges, the legacy board seat with Brian Halvorson's reindeer face grinning through a conflict of interest. It was all real. I pulled out my flash drives, the backups, the files I wasn't supposed to still have. Not to reread them. I knew them by heart, but to remind myself I hadn't dreamt the rot. I laid them out on my coffee table like tarot cards and just stared. Kestros, Clause 14, Brian, Tanya V., the filing ninja queen of South Florida. It didn't feel like evidence anymore. Felt like a fuse waiting for flame. Still, by midnight I was spiraling. Had I just nuked my career over a technicality? Would I be blacklisted? Labeled uncooperative? Or unprofessional? I'd watched others get iced out for less. HR would write up a record I'd never see. Recruiters would ghost me before I even clicked submit. But at the bottom of all that anxiety was something else. A strange calm, like I'd said the thing I wasn't supposed to say. And instead of the world collapsing, someone had heard it. Grayson heard it. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one. The silence was the worst part. 3 days. No calls, no emails, no LinkedIn pings. Not even a courtesy rejection from the couple of jobs I'd panic applied to just to feel like I still existed. My name was ice in the company's mouth, and I knew better than to expect anyone to check in. Half my old team probably didn't even know I was gone. The other half had already scrubbed me out of their memory like a corrupted spreadsheet. On day 2, I deleted Slack from my phone. Not because I wanted to move on, but because the app kept pinging me with workspace access revoked. Every time I checked if someone had DM'd me. They hadn't. I spent that time like a ghost haunting my own apartment, watching the news, refreshing financial blogs, reading between the lines of CEO statements like they were sacred texts from a dying cult. Nothing. The same smiling boilerplate about growth outlooks and synergistic expansions. Not a single whisper about Clause 14. Kestros didn't exist in their public vocabulary. I'd shouted into the storm and it looked like it had swallowed me whole. But then came day 4. I was brushing my teeth, half-dressed, half-deranged, when I saw it. A tiny headline on a logistics insider blog I followed out of habit. Interline CFO takes sudden medical leave amid personal health matters. No photo, no details. Just a short, sterile paragraph and a statement from PR about privacy and recovery, which in corporate code meant, we're trying to contain a leak and spin it as a spa day. That same morning, the Internal Audit Committee sent out a press release, reaffirming integrity through proactive governance. Translation: someone somewhere had tripped the alarm. My fingers trembled as I checked the timestamps. The CFO's leave had been announced at 8:12 a.m. The audit at 8:31. Someone was stitching parachutes while the plane was already smoking. At 9:06, my phone rang. No caller ID. Just unknown number. I stared at it for 3 rings, then answered. Hello. A woman's voice. Crisp. Professional. Like she'd been trained to sound calm during minor emergencies. Is this Claire Morgan? Yes. This is Amanda, Mr. Grayson's assistant. He'd like to extend an invitation. Silence. To what exactly? A confidential consultation regarding your recent observations during the stakeholder event. Off record. You'd retain full independence. He believes your insights may assist a special committee he's convening for internal evaluation purposes. My mouth was suddenly dry. You mean the audit? She paused carefully. I can't comment on scope, but he believes your perspective may provide valuable clarity. He asked me to emphasize this is entirely optional. I blinked. My heart felt like it was trying to sprint out of my chest. Why me? Another pause. Then, because you asked the right question. She gave me a time, a location, a non-disclosure link already waiting in my inbox. No promises, no compensation discussed. Just an open door I hadn't expected and wasn't sure I trusted. When the call ended, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was charged, like the stillness before a storm breaks. I hadn't been buried. I'd been noticed. And now someone wanted to hear what I had to say, not to shut me down, but to listen. Cautiously, I clicked the NDA. Read every line. There it was, plain as paper. Special Committee on Governance Integrity. Independent consultation request. I poured a fresh cup of coffee. Sat down at my dining table like it was a war room. And for the first time in a week, I opened my folders not to protect myself, but to prepare. The room was nothing like I imagined. No mahogany conference table, no artfully staged skyline view. Just a plain, windowless floor in a downtown co-op office space. Carpet smelled like old printer ink. Lights buzzed faintly. And yet the men and women seated around that table? Titans. Not the loud ones who make magazine covers, but the quiet ones who pull the strings behind market moves. Power wrapped in muted wool and plain watches. The kind of people who sign 9-figure checks and sleep soundly after. There were 5 of them. Grayson, of course, at the head. No introduction needed. The others were less familiar but carried that same deliberate stillness. Like they already knew how the story ended and were just deciding how many heads would roll in the retelling. Amanda, the assistant who'd called me, nodded at the empty chair across from them. I sat. They offered coffee. I declined. Grayson didn't waste time. Walk us through it. From the top. So I did. I started with the public filings, Kestro's holdings, its fake headquarters, its non-existent revenue trail, and the shell layering that would have made a mob accountant proud. Showed them the screenshots, the cross-reference timestamps, the Florida registration links back to Tanya V., the registered agent who moonlighted as a business ninja for hire. Then I opened the next folder, Clause 14. I walked them through the timeline of when it should have been triggered, the internal policy that tied it to regulatory clearance, and the sudden disappearance of the reporting folder 2 days before the board signed off on the acquisition. One of the committee members, a wiry man with glasses like microscope lenses, asked, "Was there any signature trail confirming clearance?" I pulled up the audit log metadata. Blank entry. Modified without version history. "This file was forged," I said calmly. "Or at the very least edited to appear finalized. There's no authentication certificate. No legal watermark. That got a scribble from someone's fountain pen." I kept going. Brian Halvorson's name came next. His seat on Kestro's board. The conflict of interest disclosure that was never filed. His signature approving the acquisition package. One woman leaned forward. "You're sure it's the same Brian?" I nodded. Same social. Same bio. Same LinkedIn post tagging our CEO after their strategic golf summit. They scrubbed it, but I archived it. I showed them the screenshot. The room went very still. Not tense, just sharpened. Like a needle point before the final stitch. Finally, one of them, the youngest, maybe late 30s, asked what I'd been waiting to hear. Why didn't anyone else catch this? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Grayson spoke for me, voice low and flat, because everyone else was busy selling the lie. He didn't look at me when he said it, just tapped the tip of his pen against the table and added, "That includes us." The others didn't argue. Someone coughed. Another jotted something down. The woman who'd asked about Brian said softly, "It'll hold up?" I nodded. "If you get the server logs from 3 days before the stakeholder gathering, you'll see the deletion timestamp." IT's audit trail goes deeper than most realize. They listened, really listened, not like a corporate town hall, where the execs already know the answer they're pretending to ask for. No one was checking their phones. No one interrupted. They were building something in their heads. Something sharp, legal, permanent. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt used, like a scalpel finally picked up after years of sitting in a drawer. But under the fatigue and flickers of rage, something else pulsed through me. Vindication. Not loud, not blazing, just steady, like a heartbeat. Amanda handed me a water bottle. Her fingers brushed mine intentionally. "You did the right thing," she murmured. Grayson didn't say anything when I left, just that same slow nod. But this time I understood what it meant. The red thread had been pulled, and now they were ready to follow it, wherever at led.it didn't take long. By Monday morning, Interline's homepage swapped its flashy IPO countdown widget for a sterile press release. In light of recent governance reviews, our public offering will be postponed to ensure all regulatory thresholds are satisfied. Translation: the SEC had come knocking, and someone forgot to hide the bodies. Subpoenas started flying like confetti at a doomed wedding. Financial records, internal audits, even personal email logs. Half the executive suite took personal time the same day. The other half, suddenly unreachable. The CFO never returned from his so-called medical leave. The press called it a quiet exit. I call it a tactical retreat. 3 weeks later, a blurry photo popped up in a finance subreddit. Him in Lisbon, sipping something expensive in a white linen shirt, trying to look invisible. He failed. The CEO lasted longer, stubborn, smiling at cameras like nothing was burning behind his eyes. He did a few interviews full of vague promises and temporary headwinds. Then came the internal memo. Effective immediately, Jonathan Pierce will step down as Chief Executive Officer amid a routine leadership transition aligned with our core values. Core values, my ass. They escorted him out the back before lunch. The board scrambled to calm investors. Press teams rolled out new messaging about renewed transparency and the future of ethical logistics. And right in the middle of that chaos, 2 names were floated as interim innovation leads: Maya and Dominic. I nearly dropped my coffee when I read the headline. Maya, my intern 2 summers ago, who used to leave sticky notes on my monitor that said, "Remember to blink." Dominic, my cubicle neighbor who once spent an entire lunch break teaching me how to do a pivot table using only the keyboard. They weren't flashy, weren't loud, but they were sharp, honest, quietly brilliant. And now, they were being handed the mess to fix. I couldn't have picked better if I'd written the script myself. Then came the email. Subject line: Consulting Opportunity, Compliance Strategy Lead. Sent from Amanda's address. Short and formal. On behalf of Mr. Grayson, we'd like to extend a full-time advisory role within the restructured compliance division, under direct board oversight. 6 figures. No public accountability. Full autonomy. I stared at it for a long time, and then I said no. Not because I was ungrateful. Not because I was above it. But because I'd seen what happened when good people sat at rotten tables and hoped to clean them from within. They got used, eroded, turned into cautionary tales. I didn't want to clean the old table. I wanted to build a new one, somewhere smaller, quieter, but real. A place where Clause 14 wasn't just a footnote to be buried, but a promise. I sent a polite decline, thanked them for the offer, wished Maya and Dominic luck, and meant it. Then I closed the laptop, walked to my window, and let the afternoon light hit my face like it belonged there. It wasn't victory, not exactly, but it was something better. Clarity. The office was modest. Second floor above a bookstore that only sold used titles and overpriced coffee. The walls were still bare, except for one framed page I'd pulled from a shredded investor report, the section where they'd once quietly removed Clause 14. I hung it like a warning, or maybe a prayer. Outside, someone was arguing over a parking meter. Inside, my kettle whistled softly while I flipped open the client file that had landed on my desk that morning. Thin folder. No fluff. Just a cover page and a simple logo, Echelon Ethics, LLC. A new compliance startup out of Austin. Small team. 2 women and a guy, all ex-corporate, all former whistleblowers. They didn't want spin. They wanted safeguards. Not to patch old damage, but to prevent it. And they'd reached out to me. Not Claire from Risk. Not Claire, the difficult one. Just me. The person who asked a question in the wrong room at the wrong time. And lived to see why it mattered. I took a slow sip of coffee. Let it settle. Then came the knock. A courier with a bouquet, simple, understated. Lavender and white tulips in a ceramic vase the color of ash. No envelope, no sender. Just a small folded note. Right question. Right time. Gee. I smiled. Not because it vindicated anything. Not because it fixed what had been broken. But because someone had remembered. That's the thing they never tell you about integrity. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't kick in the door or demand a medal. It just lingers, quiet, unshakable, waiting for someone to point to the gap in the floorboards and say, "Hey, what's under there?" I leaned back in my chair. Let the morning unfold through the open window. Somewhere, I knew the old company was still trying to polish the wreckage. Maya was probably in back-to-back meetings. Dominic was probably learning the politics of saying no in 6 different ways. And I had what I needed. A new path. A real one. I wasn't loud. I wasn't famous. I just asked the one question no one wanted to answer. They fired me for it. But that question is still echoing. And now I work in the echo, where truth has weight, where memory isn't inconvenient, where systems get built not just for profit but for people. No stage lights, no IPO buzz, just a quiet desk, a good cup of coffee, and a startup trying to do it right. It's not revenge. It's realignment.